fascism to me, is not a form of government like socialism is a form of government or libertarian capitalism is a form of government. They are forms of government based in economies, but they've got that basis. Fascism is simply a means of getting power and consolidating it. And so that the person doesn't actually have to have much of a program. Like there have been, Mussolini didn't really have much of a political program, but he knew how to beat the drums and get everybody involved. And so that's the point, is that fascism is the means by which somebody gains power, consolidates it, and holds it.
Hello everybody, this is Pascal from Neutrality Studies, and today I'm talking to Dr. Niall McLaren, commonly known as Jock, an Australian psychiatrist, author and critic. Dr. McLaren wrote, among other works, the very insightful book Narcisso-Fascism, the psychopathology of right-wing extremism, in which he explores in great detail the connection between pathological narcissism, fascism as a societal phenomenon, and the role of dominance in state systems. This is what we want to discuss today. So, Dr. McLaren, Jock, welcome.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
It's great having you. You reached out to me and sent me your book, actually, and I'm very grateful for that, because I've been looking for for somebody who studied psychology, knows psychology, and also practiced it and tries to connect it with society. And you're doing exactly that. Could you maybe first give us a little bit of background about yourself and how you came to do this? Because it doesn't often happen that psychologists go into the societal sphere.
No. Well, I graduated in medicine in West Australia, and my original plan was to study neurosurgery, specialize in neurosurgery. So I started the surgical training program, but they gave me a term of psychiatry, and I realized that was what I actually wanted. So I jumped from surgery to psychiatry, and within 2 days in psychiatry, I realized that all of this talk the professors were going on about with brain enzymes and chemistry and stuff like that, it was all wrong. They didn't know what they were talking about. Not a bit. And that got me into, telling them got me into a lot of trouble. Perhaps if I'd kept quiet, it would have been different, but that's not part of me. So I went through psychiatry and very quickly realized that none of these people know what they're talking about. They don't have a theory of psychiatry. They don't have a theory of mind. They don't have a model of mental disorder, anything. So 4 days after I graduated in psychiatry, I went across to the medical library, which was just behind my office, and sat down and thought, I am going to write the definitive theory of psychotherapy. It should take me a year or two.
Cute.
Youthful idealism. 44 years later, I published this, Natural Dualism and Mental Disorder. This is the biocognitive model of psychiatry. That's my integrative model of mind and body. Now, you have to understand that psychiatry doesn't like talking about minds. They only want to talk about brain enzymes and genes and brain scans and all that sort of scientific stuff.
The reductionist approach that
Yes.
every emotional state is just the product of something lighting up.
It's a brain state. It's a brain state. And therefore an abnormal mental state or emotional state is an abnormal brain state. And our job is to discover that and find a way of correcting it. That's psychiatry's role in the modern world. And there's no truth in any of this, none at all, which is not a popular point of view. So I've actually gone a bit further. I'm going to pull out all my books and published this last year. So this is Theories in Psychiatry. The first section looks at every available theory in psychiatry and concludes that it's no good. Absolutely waste of time. Second section looks at a range of modern philosophers like Chomsky, like Dennett, like Davidson, Chalmers, all of these very big names, and points out that none of their theories can be developed to the point where they can give an account of mental disorder. Right, so
this is very interesting because Dan Dennett and they're philosophers of the mind, right? They try to explain the mind, and Dennett is famous for explaining the mind away.
That's
at least
correct.
That's the criticism.
That's absolutely correct. That's exactly what he did. And in the last instance of his work, as you know, he died last year. In the last instance of his work, he invoked what he called a virtual machine to complete the causal chain. And what's a virtual machine? Well, it's insubstantial, unlocalized, doesn't follow the laws of the physical universe, and it's causally effective in the physical universe. That's the design criteria for a mind. So he failed. Dennett's life work failed. I did point this out in a paper, but he never saw it. He was too ill. Anyway, so that led me to write this what I call a definitive theory, an integrative model of mind and brain. And in order to do that, you must show how the mind emerges from the brain, which I've done on a mathematical basis, starting with George Boole's algebra, his dual-valued calculus, and building it up there. So there's all sorts of interesting stuff. It's very interesting. And part of that, it led me to look at something called the challenge hypothesis in biology. This was first discovered in birds in the 1970s, and they found that it studies the testosterone economy. And when a bird is challenged, it responds with a surge of testosterone, which gets it ready to meet the challenge. Mm. And if it beats the other bird off, these is males, it gets a further surge of testosterone. So he struts around feeling really good. If he's beaten, his testosterone level goes right down very, very quickly, like minutes. And he slinks off and hides. Now, this has been investigated in all mammals, not every possible mammal, but all major mammal groups, reptiles, fish, and birds, and Homo sapiens, and it's true across the board. Either testosterone or one of its very close analogues in biology, which implies that testosterone is a very old hormone. And the important thing about it is it's a feel-good hormone. It's great. Mm-hmm. You get a blast of testosterone, you feel good. And this is very quick. We're talking of minutes. It's a powerful anabolic hormone, but it's also has this wonderful property. It makes you feel good, and you strut around, and you're ready to take on all comers. And the other thing is, it makes you see challenges. It makes you see threats. So this is an integral part of the threat response. We've always talked about the adrenaline response, but a very large part of that is, in fact, the testosterone response, and it's been ignored. And so that's what led me to look at this in human affairs. And when you look at human affairs from the point of view of humans trying to become dominant, because the dominant male feels good. If he's knocked off his perch, he starts to feel bad, and he goes down the hierarchy, the worse he feels. So the humans or the animals at the base of the hierarchy feel bad, and they want to get back up it. So they are going to try and knock this top dog off, the alpha male. They're cowed into submission and they just walk around like hunched slaves, or they're plotting and planning, how are we going to get rid of this bloke? They're going to attack him. And this is across the board. Now, this is very important, because if you want to explain mass psychology, which is a polite word for politics, then you must drop down a level and explain it on the basis of the individual psychology. And this becomes very important when you look at somebody like John Mearsheimer, the American political scientist. Now, Mearsheimer says that international relations are anarchic. Therefore, every nation must struggle and fight to establish dominance in its local area. He calls it local hegemony, but I don't. I call it dominance because that's the word we use across biology. And I think that's important to make everybody realize we are talking mass biology.
This this is fantastic, and this is very, very important. Let me, before we go into the
Yes,
different concepts that you explain in your book, let me ask you this though. If we do if we do explain society or society's function, society's workings as a function of individual psychology,
yes,
can we do? Then we also engage in a reductionist approach, right? And we go to the smaller entity. Are there,
yes,
in your view, emergent properties to a system, that are not exhibited on a lower level, but that out of the way the system interacts start emerging on the higher level? Is that a factor or not?
yes, that is a factor. I cover that in detail, the concept of emergence,
Mm,
because it's critically important.
mm.
Um, and it's also very difficult. There is a mathematical theory of emergence, which I have to admit I don't actually grasp.
Yeah, because
Um,
like for people like Mearsheimer, this is of course very important because they explain international relations only as a function of of the external world, and he says so, and he also says this
yeah,
theory is sometimes wrong, but
yeah,
70% right, and that means that he ignores not only individual psychology, of course, he also ignores like local politics. He said it doesn't matter, whereas he's also honest enough to say like that he wrote an entire book about the Israel lobby that basically uses a completely different approach.
mhm,
But so in your view, the emergent properties are crucial for then the whole system, I suppose.
yes, yes. And what we can call mass psychology or politics um, is in fact individual psychology writ large,
Mm.
and that's very important. So um, when now the problem with Mearsheimer's work is he um, says that international relations are anarchic, therefore nations must struggle to establish dominance, local dominance. I say he's wrong. He's completely wrong. He's got it back to front. Right? The reason international relations are anarchic is because individual nations are all struggling for local dominance. And the reason they're all struggling for local dominance is because that's what Homo sapiens does. That's us. We all struggle for dominance. And it's just, the politicians get themselves onto bigger stages. I mean, they love it. The politicians are fascinated by this. They love power. Yeah, that's why they're in politics. And so then you get people who, well, look, Trump is a perfect example. Um, totally devoid of any talent or any interest, but this absolute fascination with power and dominating people. And he was glowing earlier this year, and he said, there's 175 nations lined up to kiss my ass.
Mm.
That that is him. That's why he's in politics.
Yeah, this is where we need to explore narcissism.
Yes.
Can you put it into a nutshell so that we can understand it? Like,
Well, narcissism, people talk about narcissism as though it's something bad, but it's not. It's actually one extreme of the concept of self-regard. Now, we have to have some sense of self-regard. You've got to think, well, I'm a reasonable person and I'm entitled to do this and I'm supposed to do that. And if I do my jobs, then I am a slightly better person and all of those things. So when you meet in psychiatry, you meet a lot of people who've got no self-regard, no self-esteem. They've usually had terrible childhoods, and this is where sexual abuse and um, physical abuse comes in because that just kills their self-esteem. And so they can grow up either to be cowed, submissive individuals who are too scared to look up, or they can become aggressive to cover it up. And that's extremely common. So the other end of that's the low self-esteem, which of course is the bulk of psychiatric practice. But the other end is people who've got extremely high self-regard in the sense that they believe they're entitled to whatever they like. I look at that, then I'll have that. Thank you. Hand it over. I look at that woman, send her across. I look at that house, move out because I want to move in. And this is the politics of entitlement. This is what wealthy people do. They're brought up to believe that they are entitled to more and more. The problem is, the more they get, the more they believe they're entitled to. It just feeds on itself.
And in this sense, the narcissism, the way that you talk about it in the book, is though this extreme like individual psychological trait, so to entitlement and also to the right to use power. I mean,
Yes.
the
Yes.
can you expand on that a little bit more, and maybe just use Donald Trump as an example whenever, because I think he's so paradigmatic for this.
Well,
But it would go for others, of course, right? I mean,
yeah. I mean, there's thousands, millions of examples. But there's different themes in narcissism. Is there the sense of self-regard, and at the ordinary working person's level, it's just I'm an ordinary person. I'm not outstanding. I've got certain rights, but I've got a lot of duties too. And then something happens, and they look better, and they go, "Oh, look at me! Oh, I'm fantastic. This is lovely. I'll have more, thank you." And this is exactly what armies do. They take all of these poor, miserable kids, 18 years of age, and their brains are like putty. I should mention that I've had a lot of military experience in terms of dealing with veterans and serving members, over 45 years or something. So I've seen a lot of veterans. And always it's the same story. This poor kid, usually from a broken family. I think 80% of recruits in the UK are from broken families, that sort of thing. So they join the military to feel better, to feel wanted, to feel part of something big, as distinct from feeling like an outcast. And then they're put into this pretty uniform, gorgeous uniform, and they go off to gym and they bulk up, and they suddenly, look at me, ah, and then it just grows and grows and grows. And that's the other point too about the concept of a cognitive psychology, is that it changes with time. It is not static. It is not fixed. And so people can change according to their circumstances, and that's where it gets complicated. But anyway, we'll put that aside. So the element of narcissism is look at me. But when that is combined with the drive for power, those two things come together, then we've got trouble.
Yeah, and then you explain that that's where the narcissism starts interacting with fascism, and fascism,
Yes.
in your view, in your book, is not something that just was here in the 1920s and 1930s in Germany, Italy, and Japan. It's something completely different. Can you? It's really huge. Can you help approach it?
Well, fascism to me, is not a form of government like socialism is a form of government, or libertarian capitalism is a form of government. They are forms of government based in economies, but they've got that basis. Fascism is simply a means of getting power and consolidating it, and so that the person doesn't actually have to have much of a program. Like there have been, Mussolini didn't really have much of a political program, but he knew how to beat the drums and get everybody involved. And so that's the point: is that fascism is the means by which somebody gains power, consolidates it, and holds it. And
Yeah, but so this is a universal trait of all political
yes,
systems. Where do we draw the line between normal fascism, of just how politics works, out of the sheer fact that we need to organize ourselves in groups, um, and you know the back and forth between different individuals having different needs, and where does it then become something that we need to worry about in the way that we use the term usually?
Well, what you would like is that the form of government is democratic, and so you have very strict rules, checks, balances, all that sort of stuff in place to ensure that nobody can get power and consolidate it and hold it.
So a good
No
democratic
person.
system is actually anti-fascistic in the sense that it
Yes,
distributes power because it cannot
just,
accumulate.
that's right. That is absolutely correct. So it's the accumulation of power in a hierarchy of power. That's the dangerous bit. So anything that causes power to be spread evenly or distributed evenly through the electorate is the correct approach. So when people say, "Oh, but socialism is, anti-hierarchical," no, it's not. Not at all. All power vests in a small inner group who have control of the economic system. Look at Stalin, perfect example of fascism within a socialist system. So fascism should be seen as something like the decorations on a Christmas tree. Doesn't matter what tree you use, as long as you put these decorations on, it becomes a Christmas tree. Same with forms of government. Doesn't matter what form of government you use, if you decorate it with these fascist tropes, then you will end up with a fascist system. But the important thing is to destroy the democratic base of society. Precisely what is going on it's going on pretty well around the world. You know, in America, they disenfranchised something like 5 million voters before the last election, and they were the ones that's why Trump got back in.
I,
Um,
Sorry, it's
right?
just I find this very interesting, this definition of fascism, because, you know, in the Second World War, one of the things I studied from a PhD very intensely is the Japanese, what happened in Japan. And Japan is
Yes,
fascinating because, in a sense, it's the opposite of what you're describing. It's usually described as fascist, but actually one of the problems the country had is that power was so distributed among so many centers, especially within the armed forces, and then one institution was able to drag along the other one. And, you know,
yes,
in between 31 and 45, Japan had 13 cabinets. 13.
yes,
I mean, kept collapsing. So, and this is,
yes.
in a sense, is like the opposite of what you're describing as the accumulation of power under only a few.
Well, there was the power invested in the emperor, of course,
Yes.
and the royal court, the imperial court. Um, but then down below that, a level below that, you had this vast squabbling mass
Hmm.
of people all trying to get to pull in their little bailiwick and make it bigger and bigger and get the others and shove them under. I mean, if Japan had conquered that tendency in 1931, they would have won the Second World War. You know,
Yeah,
it was
it my prediction would be that they wouldn't have gone that way, because, in a sense, what happened was extreme power accumulation within the different centers of power. No, not even that is true. I mean, even like I don't know. Okay, but maybe let's put this one aside and analyze it
we'll
separately.
have to.
Let's go back to the main issue, which is this fascism then creates is the tendency towards creating the pyramid,
It is.
and
It is.
that interacts
It,
with dominance, the idea of dominance in your book.
it
Can you go
is
there?
right. Well, the the all animals, but in particular, we'll talk about the human animal. We've got our survival imperatives: fresh air, sunlight, food, water, shelter. Right?
Mm.
They're your survival imperatives. You've got to have those satisfied first. Once they're satisfied, we then move on to the optional drives. And the first of the big optional drives is the social drive. We are social animals. We like to get together. And the most damaging punishment for an individual is to be expelled from the society, to become a refugee or you know, somebody has a homeless person.
Lose your home.
That's yeah, yeah. If you have no home, if you have no tribe, you're in serious trouble. And you can imagine that there might be some evolutionary pressures to this. You go back 100,000 years, the individual who didn't fit in with his tribe was not going to survive. He would be out there in the wilderness and he would die. And so there's there's no question, human anxiety is abated by human contact. It is quickly abated. Once that's satisfied, the social drive, then we move on to the next big one, which is the dominance drive. As soon as we form a society, we form a dominance hierarchy. That is just how it is, because being high on the dominance hierarchy feels better than being low. And so there's this intense drive going on all the time. In humans, in any group of humans, anywhere, they will try and sort themselves into a dominance hierarchy. You can watch little children in kindergarten, and you can watch anything you like, but everything we do, all the big institutions, the military, religion, politics, academia, these are all industry, finance, these are all dominance hierarchies. So everybody's struggling to get to the top.
But there is a difference though, right? Because in my perception, there are people who seek dominance very much and others who dislike the game and but there's a difference in preference towards dominance seeking. And I think the narcissists are the ones who do that the most, right?
That's right. Yes, because then they sit there and say, oh, look at me, look at my crown, look at my jewels, look at my military decorations, look at my muscles. Everybody must look at me. And if somebody's not looking, take that man out and punish him.
And in popular belief, this is then ascribed to small self-esteem. But if I understand you correctly, that's not what it is it?
It can be either of the extremes. Ordinary people don't want to be the center of attention, but they also don't want to be excluded. So we're quite happy being ordinary. That's what ordinary means. But it's the extremes. So the extreme of low self-esteem, that's the province of psychiatry and psychology and criminology, right? So if you're working in prisons, as I did, you will come across, it's just pretty normal. They've all got poor self-esteem. That includes a lot of the staff too. And if you go to the other end, the high self-esteem comes with high sense of entitlement and the desire for more power.
And this drive then, I mean, this triangle of not a triangle, just this interaction between dominance and the tendency of this system to create fascist structures, these ornaments on the tree. How does that work in societies?
Well, because the people at the top very quickly work out what will bring people in to worship them. If you want to recruit soldiers to an army, you don't say to them, right, well, you're all going to walk around in pink tutus and ballet shoes. You wouldn't get any recruits. You must show them a stirring picture of men with things walking around with guns, helmets, all their goggles and that, and they fall for it. They love it. They love the masculinity, which of course leads to another field that is very interesting, which is the homoeroticism of the military. But perhaps we'll leave that one. That is a very big field.
No, I would like to go there. I mean, I would like, we talked only briefly about this before, but it's such an important part of fascism. Also, because others have, a good friend of mine always said, look, fascism is best understood as an aesthetic phenomenon, because aesthetics is essential, especially homoerotic aesthetics and aesthetic of the male body. You put it on the cover of your book.
Put it on the cover. This is an Italian fascist poster from 1932. Look at this lovely man there, and in his beautiful shorts. So you can see his legs. It's all very pretty, stylized, gorgeous, and that's part of the ethos.
Why is it that there's this clear not only aesthetic but homoerotic aesthetic? And we all
Yes,
know that when we look, I mean, Nazi uniforms were
yes,
extremely well crafted, and they show the male body in a very, you know, in an almost erotic like
it is. It
position.
is.
Why?
Be- because it's all driven by testosterone. The dominance hierarchy is driven by testosterone.
Mm,
And so that leads to an important point. So the person going up the hierarchy feels better and better, and he's having more and more inner juice. The person going down the hierarchy feels very bad,
mm.
and so he will fight to be put against being pushed down. So that leads us to the paradox of hierarchy. On the one hand, we've got this intense drive to go to the top and to stay there. And on the other hand, balancing that is a fear and loathing of being pushed down and treated as second rate. So the suppressed or oppressed person must fight. He has to fight to retain his self-esteem. And we should tell Mr. Netanyahu this. He doesn't understand it.
No, I mean he's obviously cog in the entire in this entire I want to use this very bad term that doesn't really explain anything, an S show like of what's going on, but the this drive then that makes societies go not just violent but genocidal, right? I think Israel is showing us like what a society is at a point when you're really far down that
Yes.
road where
Yeah.
where even the mass murder of people, of incarcerated people, becomes something that makes you feel good and gives you more testosterone, because that's probably what's going on.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Because we're killing our enemies,
Yeah.
you see. So that's now become the motive.
Mm.
Yeah, Israel, the Middle East or Israel is an incredibly complicated subject. But if you stand back and look at it through the lens of the dominance hierarchy, you start to see a different picture. This has got nothing to do with religion, nothing to do with justice, nothing to do with democracy, none of that. It's all about we are going to crush you and drive you out and take this land for ourselves.
Right.
That's all. There's nothing else. Forget all the other junk. That's just propaganda.
So what
Uh,
about this element of like settler colonial enterprise and so on? I mean, in this sense, it's just a function of what you just said. It's just
yeah, exactly. It's like Australia is a perfect example of the settler colonial attitude. The British sailed up the east coast of Australia, saw this land, thought, oh, that looks nice. We will have it. That was it. They just moved in.
and
And
then establish dominance, and who
that's,
doesn't like it needs to go.
that's it. And so any Aboriginals that resisted were killed.
Yeah.
They were wiped out. Um, Partly they were wiped out by disease because they had no resistance to European diseases. And the Aboriginals around Sydney Harbour were wiped out in about 2.5 years, mainly by smallpox. If you go to the Kimberley region in northern Western Australia, where I worked for 6 years as the world's most isolated psychiatrist. Um, they were they had no resistance to whooping cough and measles, and they very nearly died out. In the 1930s, there were only about 300 or 400 left in the whole area of about 100,000 square kilometres. Only a few hundred people left in around Colombo. And so that's what happened, is that the British sailed up the east coast of Australia, thought, that looks nice. Why don't we have it? And that's the same. They did the same in India. They did the same in Canada, South Africa. And the French did the same in North Africa. The Dutch did the same in Indonesia. They just walked in. It's only 1926 since since the Dutch conquered Bali.
Mm.
And there was a slaughter, a huge slaughter when they took control of Bali. That's only, that's not that long ago. It's not 100 years. It's 100 years ago next year.
It's incredible, and it's that especially incredible is the belief in to me in Europe, North America, and the collective West, that colonialism is over, right, long gone. I mean, we don't do that anymore. It's like, oh, come on, Jesus. But okay, let's get back to this how the psychology of dominance and striving for it then impacts these societies that then create militaristic um, militaristic societies that also
Yes.
glorify, of course, the
Yes.
military. And you give this beautiful example actually of the UK and the funeral of the Queen.
Well, yeah, I think anybody who watched that, I watched them because the family are watching them, and it is history. Um, I remember her coronation, and I remember her father dying, the king's death, and now we see her death. But the entire ceremony was it was an exercise in social hierarchies. You had the religion, right? So there's the Archbishop of Canterbury with his gorgeous robes. They come straight from Byzantium, those robes. That's where they all came from. And underneath him is this hierarchy. And then you go outside and they have the parade, and it is a military parade. That's it. And there were only, I can't remember, I did try and work out the number of people marching. It was many, many hundreds, or if not thousands.
Your microphone, can you put it closer to your mouth, the microphone?
Sorry. Yeah, I knocked it by mistake. I'm not used to it. There were not, I can't remember how many people were marching. It was many hundreds, if not in the thousands, but all of them were in military uniform except for two, and they were in disgrace. Prince Andrew and Prince Harry. They were forced to wear civilian clothes, and they lost status, and you could see it in their faces. They felt inferior. And this is what the military does. The military has had thousands upon thousands of years to perfect the art of making young men feel tough and good. Look at the Roman uniforms. Look at the Spartan uniforms, the Persian uniforms, Chinese, and in Japan, of course, the samurai uniforms going back many, many hundreds of years. They're all designed to make you feel good and superior to the civilians.
You don't only need to be protected, or they don't only need to have function, they also need to have form in order to fulfill psychological
Absolutely.
functions. And that's then part of what you say is like this natural, this normal, like societal fascism, right?
Yeah. Yeah. It's built into society. That's all. So if you want to impress people with your status, you put on a uniform. So you go to a hospital, the doctors all walk around in white coats, even though they don't need white coats. I always refused. I never wore a white coat in my life because I thought it was just pathetic. But the medical superintendents all walk around in white coats, and all they do is sit at a desk all day.
Why is it that some people have an aversion to that? Because when I got my PhD, I avoided the ceremony because I didn't again want to wear that stupid gown, which it's just silly. It's just a silly exercise.
You're absolutely right.
Why do some people not want that? While others crave for it?
Because I think some people can see through it. They see it for what it is. This is just a whole lot of silly old men dressing up. Just to impress everybody. That's all it is. I mean, I had the same thing with, I had a gown, a psychiatry gown. I wore it once. That was it. You had to wear it. You couldn't go to the graduation without it. And after that, no, it just stayed in a cupboard until it fell apart.
And the counter argument is, of course, you need to sometimes use regalia in order to dignify a situation, in order to show respect and also elevate the other, right? It's not just the self, it's the other as well. Does this have any merit, or is that just like how people explain this silliness and the creation?
I think it's self-justifying. The regalia is just the way we've always done it, and it makes us feel good, it makes us feel superior. And look at all those miserable humans down there. We're up here with the gods. Aren't we lovely? And there's this element, always this element.
Is there also an element of again systematic control because you are forced to do it? So if you don't, you might not be allowed in.
Well, that's it. It's part of the tribal initiation.
Mm.
So if you want to belong to our group, you must conform to what we say. You must do precisely as we say. Otherwise, we will expel you. And then you'll wander lonely, lonely as a cloud, as they say, until you die. But you won't be part of our group. And humans are social animals. We are driven to belong.
At which point does then fascism or fascist tendencies in society? I mean, you can make in that case the argument that certain fascist tendencies are normal and maybe even healthy, you know, in an international system that is built on other on others seeking dominance too. And if you have a certain level of dominance, you could build a certain structure that actually holds without going all out to war. And you know, this idea of a security architecture, for instance, where different poles and interact with I mean, create something stable. But at which point does fascism then become self-destructive and create excess?
Well, it's when they overreach themselves, when they decide we are semi-divine, we are the anointed ones, we are going to lay down the law for every other human being we can. So this is what the Nazis did in Eastern Europe. The war in Western Europe was just a prelude. As you know, the main drive of the war was to establish an empire in the East, and they were going to clear out half to two-thirds of the Slavs and keep the rest as slaves, which is where the word Slav comes from. And that was their goal. That was their stated goal. I mean, Hitler makes it absolutely explicit in Mein Kampf that this is what he's going to do. And then so where does it become, where does it go over? It's when you just start to regard the other as not human, as inferior, human animals in the current vogue, you see. And so when you say it doesn't matter, we don't have to take any notice of them, they're in our way, get out the bulldozers, run over them. So there is a cutoff point. It's when you stop regarding humans as having rights equal to your own.
That society then at some point does that too, right? And you see it right now. I mean, we have this example from yesterday where now the whole of Europe and North America is screaming bloody murder over a damaged hospital in Israel. We have yet to find out if it was directly targeted or if the target was one of the military installations. I mean, this one aside, there's a huge outcry over that, while at the same time it is just an acknowledged and accepted fact that 36 hospitals in Gaza have been razed to the ground with the people in them, to a large part. And then this one is now kind of, you know, especially for Europe and North America, you know, I mean, we know that this is a fact, but this matters only to very few people, whereas to the large group, it now matters much more that there's a damaged hospital here. So how does this individual psychological trait translate into the way that society and media and so on then interacts with these crimes?
Well, they're not going to tell the truth. You can be sure of that. They're going to put their gloss on it. But the simple fact is it's pure racism.
So the individuals are not going to use that. And that's why we then have journalists who report on one but not the other, or ignore one, not the other.
Well, the journalists want to get up the journalist ladder. You see, they're all fighting to get up the ladder. And if they can, you know, write something that pleases the president or the king or whatever, the general, that will get them higher up the ladder and they can look down on their colleagues and laugh. Ha, 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 look where I am. But the arrant hypocrisy of the West in daring to draw attention to a damaged hospital in Israel while ignoring the as you said, the raised hospitals in Gaza is pure racism. Right? They don't care if the Palestinians are killed because they're just wogs. Right? They're wogs. Let's not mince words. That's how people think. It's they don't care.
Is
They're
there like
second-rate human beings.
is there, I mean, is there any other way to understand racism other than the strive for dominance of the own group
No.
of the other? And that's what
Oh yes, there is this strong element of, part of being social animals is that we have a fear of the other.
Mm.
Right. So we have this very strong inherent xenophobia. And it's real. You can see it in 2-year-old children. And younger children than that will display a fear of somebody they don't know. And so that's just there. I mean, again, you can say, well, there's probably survival value in that. If you look at baboons, and a baby baboon goes to the wrong adult, it's likely to get killed.
Mm.
So there's a fear. And I think this has got a genetic basis. It's just hardwired into us. When we turn around and see somebody we don't know, we jerk, instant.
And
And so and racism was always, we whites are God's gift to humanity. And in fact, those blacks really aren't fully human at all. And
how
that was that was the attitude of the British in Australia.
right.
They really didn't think Aboriginal people were human. They thought they were clever monkeys.
Yeah. But how do we explain then that we see entire movements over generations in the West, right? Fighting or pretending to fight racism, even systemic racism and so on, and using that as a theme, saying like we recognize we have that problem and we want to get rid of it, and we even have terms like equity, diversion, and inclusion, and
Yes.
we try to do all of that, but then the very people who do that are the ones who scream some of the ones who scream the hardest for like Israel's right to self-defense. I mean, it's all. Can we speak to that?
Yeah, I could, but probably we'd have to have a seminar on that, I think, and a dozen speakers over several days. Um, this, the, I said earlier that the human psychology evolves and changes within the person's lifetime. So a person at 18 can think, I'm going to be nice to everybody. I don't like racism. I don't like putting gays down. And then, but by 35, he's going up the ladder and he's starting to think, oh, why don't those people work harder like I did? You see? And everybody at the top believes they got there by virtue of their superior moral equipment, right? They don't believe it was luck. Of course, it's all luck.
There's this.
And go on. Sorry, you go.
There's this beautiful a little schematic that shows like the symbol, the transformation of the emblem symbol going from the A for anarchist to the peace sign of the round
Yes.
peace sign, going to the Mercedes-Benz star.
Absolutely.
the trend
Absolutely.
over lifetime.
Yes. And that's true. There are similar trends in psychology. There was a chap called Stephen Karpman who talked about the Karpman's triangle with a victim, a persecutor, and a rescuer, and how this changes with the passage of time, and the victim becomes the persecutor. And we what better example have we got than Israel? The victims have become the persecutors. That's it. And yet, but they have industrialized their victimology to the point where they've got practically everybody in the world paralyzed by the thought, we mustn't criticize these people. They're victims. Don't forget they're victims. Got to feel sorry for them. Okay, they're going a bit overboard, but that's what victims do. We mustn't criticize. And they've just perfected this art of controlling the world from underneath with pulling the strings of the victimology.
The victimology, yes, and Jan Oberg on my channel made this observation that no violence is more dangerous and more intense than victim violence because they feel entitled to use all and any violence.
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
but what fascinates me is that at the moment, Germany being the persecutor of the first of that large crime, and now washing its guilt by allowing the former victim to commit exactly the same crime and thereby like going through a catharsis themselves. At least that's what it looks like to me.
Yes, but Merritt said yesterday or the day before that it's a fantastic thing that Israel is smashing the Iranians. They're doing our work for us.
Our dirty work. They do the dirty work for us.
That's right. That's it.
They
do the dirty work of killing the other.
And right now in the Twitter sphere, in the German-speaking Twitter sphere, you have so many people in very high places, very important, like also in journalism zone, who all say like, Mr. Merz, thank you for your strong words. I mean, it's important to have leadership in this moment. This is
yeah, because they're too scared to lose their status by saying, you arsehole, you murderous arsehole, you Nazi, which is what he is, covertly. And they know that if they say that, they lose their status. They're kicked out.
So I mean, in your analysis, it would be fair to say that the Germans got rid of that the Americans got rid of the Nazis in Germany, but never got rid of the Nazi psychology in Germany.
That's right. Yeah.
At least
because it's inherent,
group of people. There's just that group of people.
But it's inherent in all humans.
Yes. We're all Nazis.
We're all Nazis. Le fasciste, c'est moi.
Yeah.
It's very important to remember,
yeah, no, I'm absolutely, I think it's absolutely correct. Yeah. If you externalize guilt for mass violence, that's already the first step toward committing more of it.
Yeah, and this just goes on and on. And
how can we deal with that without ending up in self-hate?
Well, I think an important step is at the academic level. I mean, and you've got a very good academic background in these studies, whereas I'm the outsider. In fact, that's an important point too, being an outsider. But one of the things that I think we need to look at is the influence of people like John Mearsheimer, who says international relations are anarchic, therefore nations must fight and struggle to gain local dominance and to ensure peace within their borders. I think he's completely wrong. He's got it back to front. International relations are anarchic because nations are fighting for dominance.
Yes.
And what better example have we got than the Middle East? But the problem with that view of his is it licenses aggression. Right. And Israel has just said, we are going to smash the Iranians to destroy their weapons of mass destruction, which they don't have. And because if we don't, they will attack us. They are an existential threat to us. No.
Yeah, although I mean, in his defense, he doesn't say it's a good thing. He doesn't excuse it. He tries to explain it, right? And people, of course, always make this thing. They don't differentiate between excuse and explanation. Mearsheimer is
right.
Firmly on the explanation side.
Yes, unfortunately. Yeah.
But if we turn it around and say like, okay, let's build a international relations theory of like how dominance creates anarchy,
yes.
Then what would that lead us to? Then what would be what's the approach in order to ameliorate the situation? Because we cannot get rid of dominance if it's innate, right?
No, but we can. Each and every nation would have to take steps to guarantee to the others that they're not a threat.
And you know what that is? That's international law. International law is the approach, is a try to actually do that.
And who got rid of international law and replaced it with the rules-based international order?
The dominant top dog.
Absolutely. They didn't like being constrained by laws. They didn't like being treated the same as the Soviet Union or Ethiopia or some country like that, they thought, no, we're the top dogs. You have to do as we say, because we're the shining light on the hill. We're the light of democracy. We are the, God's gift to humanity. So fall into line, all you niggers. That's what they're saying.
This is, this is very, very useful. Because we also see that right now. I saw this argument this morning, and it flabbergasted me of again a German journalist or somebody who said that look, the problem with demanding that Israel keeps to international law is like demanding that in a race people keep to the speed limit in the curves, right? So you will lose. So we need to get rid of it in order to win, and that's the psychology that then undermines the structures
Yeah.
that we build to constrain it.
Yeah, yeah. And again, all he can see is winning. We have to win. We have to win at all costs. And
Right.
that's his motivation. That's what drives him. So the whole point is that stop seeing it as a race. It's not a race. It's a walk together. And it's a group of people walking almost hand in hand, or certainly walking at the same pace, and periodically looking back to see who's fallen behind and helping them, as distinct from grabbing the nearest person and smashing them.
Yep, that's how it should be, and that's where we need to go. But we need to figure out how to constrain the forces that make us smash the other one.
Well, I think the first thing is that everybody has to know exactly what's going on.
Yeah.
And if you were to say to people, I don't know, I just pick out of people I just like intensely, Tony Blair, John Howard, and George Bush. Right, those three, they make my skin crawl. If you were to say
the three horsemen of the apocalypse, yeah.
Absolutely, the three Musketeers, um, the three fools, three stooges. If you were to say to them, chaps, this has got nothing to do with anything but your drive to invade Iraq has got nothing to do with democracy, freedom, justice, blah, blah, weapons of mass destruction, blah, blah, blah. It's got everything to do with oil and smashing the threat. Same as they did in Iran in 1953.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly the same. Same as they did to Allende in
This,
Chile in
this is where Jeffrey Sachs comes in and says, like, the neoconservative movement, they have this absolute strive for dominance, and they accept nothing less than absolute dominance. That's why they don't accept a yes as an answer. They want more than yes. They want subordination. I mean, again, we see that with Iran. The US says you cannot have nuclear bombs. The Iran says we don't have nuclear bombs. We don't want nuclear bombs. And the US and Israel do not accept that as an answer.
That's correct. Yeah, absolutely. And
because they want more. They want total control.
They want they want to reduce Iran to a smoking wasteland.
Mm-hmm.
That is what they want to do. Why? Because Iran says, no, we're not doing as you tell us. You don't own us. You don't control us. Go to hell. And then that just drives Americans and British and Germans absolutely mad. It drives them to a frenzy.
It gives them testosterone.
Yeah, because they're not as strong. They don't get the blast that they want. They want to be able to walk around and look at all the people groveling in submission.
And this also explains, I mean, if we use this theory, that also explains, this drive of what some of the founding fathers of the U.S. called the constrainers, like Quincy Adams, who said, like, America doesn't go out to seek monsters to destroy. The natural tendency is of the fascist of the fascist tendency of states is to go out and seek monsters to destroy. And even if you destroy one, you just go to the next and next. And I think in your book you make this very important point that this is where then fascism ultimately always needs to destroy itself, right?
Exactly. Yes. So the tendency is always to want more power, more glory, more control, more submission from other people. And it must feed on itself. It cannot stop. At the minute that the ordinary people realise, hey, we're being taken for a ride by these blokes, then it collapses. It falls apart. So it must go on and get bigger and bigger and more destructive. And eventually it must start to consume itself. Because if they're not achieving, then there must be a traitor. Let's get the traitor. And Stalin did this.
Yes.
Look what he did during the Great Purges. He nearly wrecked the country. He laid it open to the Nazi invasion because he couldn't stop. Now, Stalin was seriously paranoid, but let's not mince words. All politicians are paranoid. They're all paranoid.
And you see then the drive to find justifications to purge from within. We see how the Donald Trump is doing it to an extent, although there's always a question of what type of the analysis of the deep state and so on is fair or not. But let's put that aside. The Japanese had within these fascist institutions, especially the army, they had the military police, and the military police was the most feared institution because they would just go and take people out and kill them because they look for the enemy inside. We had it in Cambodia. In Cambodia, after everything collapsed, and the Khmer Rouge then committed a genocide on their own people, right? Because
they have to get rid of the enemy within. But this is all very much part of fascism itself as a political movement, because they're fighting an external enemy, and they must unite everybody inside. But at the same time, there's always an internal enemy. Nazi Germany, it was the Jews. In America, it's the woke generation at the moment. In Israel, it's the moderates. Well, the moderates there just leave. That's easy. In Iran, there was all of they had big purges after the 1979 revolution. It's the same, always the same, is get rid of the internal enemy. But then it's when the system starts to fail, then it must be because there's an enemy. It's not because our system's wrong or no good. It's because there's an internal enemy. So we start chewing it. And eventually fascism must consume itself, but it burns out. But then in a generation, guess what? It's coming back. And Bertolt Brecht said that precisely. He said, you think you've got rid of it, but guess what? The bitch is in heat again. That was in the Irresistible Rise of Arturo Ui.
Yeah, it's like, it's extremely scary. It's like, when the movie is over, you switch off the TV and there's the black screen, and in the black screen there's you see yourself, and that's the next fascist coming once the movie's over.
Starting again.
But one more, because this is very important. I mean, these connections. But one thing that I hear also from a lot of my of colleagues, including also Jan Oberg, they explain the failing and the drive towards this more militarized and fascist systems, especially in the West, in Europe, also as a function of having ended up with a kakistocracy, the rule of the dumb,
the worst.
Of the worst, the rule of the worst. Does that play into the fascistization of a society, also the way you see it?
Yeah, because the political system is open to the most aggressive player. Generally, it's not a system that cultivates the best and selects from the range of the human raw material. It selects the best. It's not like that. It's people pushing their way to the top, and the most aggressive, the least scrupulous, the most dim-witted get to the top.
And the ones who are not able to see what they're engaged in, right? They're not able to perceive the system. And
they have no insight, either personal insight or insight into the system, and mostly they have no regard for other human beings. It's all me, me, me.
Which is why Hitler shot his own colleagues in order then, once they got to the top and
in the 1934, do you mean
the killing of Röhm and
yes, Ernst Röhm. Yeah, well, that was the June the 30th, 1934, I think. Yes, he could see the threat of another pole. He wanted a unipolar Germany, and Röhm and the SR represented another pole, and so he just got rid of them. And of course, the SS were delighted to assist.
Yeah. This eh, so, and if we take this again to the international relations level, I mean, that's how we can explain, this primordial fear of the West that is so accustomed to a unipolar world that we now have several poles coming up, and that just drives the motivation for dominance, right? And
Absolutely.
that's what
Yeah, yeah,
makes them push even harder.
yeah. And all of this talk in America about China is a threat, China is aggressive, which is echoed in this stupid country of mine by these half-witted prime ministers that we've had. Um, they just parrot it. China is a threat. China is a threat. It's aggressive. We've got to have nuclear submarines to counter the Chinese threat. What absolute drivel. But anyway, yeah, it's the thought that somebody else could be on an equal standing. And there's a very strong racial element in this, very
Yeah.
strong. The Americans cannot stomach the idea of a Chinese person, of having to bow to a Chinese person. They can't. They would rather pull their tongues out with pliers than say, "Good morning, sir. Yes. How do you do? You're the boss."
Yeah.
They will
Yeah.
never say that.
Yeah. Um,
It's racist.
It is, and you look, Neil, Jock, like this is a fantastic insight that you're giving us. We already surpassed the 1 hour mark. I think we need to talk about this again, and I will reach out as soon as I will have questions coming up. Just one question, like your this inversion of like in international relations, anarchy and dominance.
Yes.
Is there a theory? Is there somebody who made that argument before that this is how we need to understand international relations?
I couldn't answer that question. I'm, you know, I'm a psychiatrist.
Yeah.
I couldn't answer from the history of international relations. What I just want to, I did mention the struggle in the dominance hierarchy of the person who's fighting to get to the top
Mm-hmm.
and the person who is fighting to get not to be pushed down. Now that is the paradox of hierarchy.
Mm-hmm.
That we've got these twin drives, twin opposed drives in each and every one of us.
Yes.
All of us want to be dominant, but none of us want to be submissive. And that's a recipe for chaos.
Yes, it
Perhaps
is.
that's why Mirshami sees chaos.
But that's what we need to explore, a psychological approach to international relations, a psychological theory of international relations.
Yes,
That seems to me a very useful way of thinking about it, because it might give us actual, tools to prevent the worst.
yes.
Okay.
I believe it does. Just one thing that you mentioned then was this um, the economic theory, which is not really a theory, of neoliberalism. Now that, to me, I have done a bit of work on that, and to me, it's all false
Mhm.
because it's not that they don't have a human psychology as a basis, and it's just the fascist drive writ in economic terms. That's all. It's a drive to
Yeah,
dominate.
yeah, it is. You know what we need to
Pure,
do? At some point, we need to discuss with colleagues who do Marxist interpretations of international relations.
yeah.
They have different concepts, but I think that there's points to connect.
The notion, there's a lot of similarity in the notions.
Mm.
Yes, yes.
Okay. Um, Jock, like people who want to read your works, I suppose they should find your books, right? Or do you have a place where you regularly write online?
I do. I write a Substack. I have a Substack file, which is niallmclaren.com. So Substack niallmclaren.com. And all of my books are available on Amazon, but I don't want anybody to buy the original ones, the early ones. They're out of date, completely out of date. There's four that count. There's theories in psychiatry. There's natural dualism, the biocognitive model of mind. There's this one, which we haven't mentioned, anxiety,
Mhm.
right? So that's much more clinical, but I think anxiety has got a very big part to play in human affairs. And last, and definitely last, no more, is Narcisso-Fascism, which is subtitled The Psychopathology of Right-Wing Extremism, but we couldn't fit it on there.
I'll put the links to all of the books and your Substack into the description of this video. Niall McLaren, Jock, thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you for yours and for stimulating me too. Okay.